टिफिन हो गइल वाले जाई।
Good morning, everyone. For those joining from India and South Asia, and there are some who have joined from West Asia, and it's even earlier morning. Pleasant day to them. And good afternoon to those in East Asia, and wishes for a pleasant evening for those in the Pacific. I'm Dr. Mala Kapoor Shankadas, who recently retired as professor from University of Delhi. And now I'm working as an international consultant. And I am the founder as well as managing trustee of Development, Welfare and Research Foundation, acronym DOF, in collaboration with ACAP, has organized this international webinar, which marks the observation of the International Women's Day being celebrated in many parts of the world in the 24-hour time span. So here's wishing everybody a happy Women's Day. Stay blessed, keep shining, and remain on top of the world. The theme for this year is Break the Bias, which has been set by United Nations, whereby we talk of equality between genders and inclusive society, breaking stereotypes, and above all, celebrate achievements of women. We talk of removing all kinds of discriminations, including of age, and thus for this webinar, we have the topic, bringing focus on older women. Because often, they are not much discussed, talked, and quite often neglected in many policies and programs. Together, we need to give women, as they age, visibility, provide a positive image of them, discuss their resilience, how they are big achievers, contributors to families, communities, and society, socially, economically, and politically. Nonetheless, this is not to undermine that while a few are privileged and live with respect and dignity, many are neglected, abused, marginalized, in fact, are a very vulnerable section of the society, often living in poverty, deprived of ownership, property rights, and many benefits, as well as entitlements. In a nutshell, older women require greater attention due to intersectionality of gender and age, and therefore, this event being held today is not only topical, but extremely relevant and significant in an aging world. In these contemporary times, a substantial number of countries are experiencing feminization of aging, which means, as many of you are aware, in most nations, the percentage and proportion of older women is more than that of older men. And this is even true in countries where women in younger age have a disadvantage. That is, as children or part of youth and adult populations, the ratio of women is less, but as they age, their numbers increase, mainly because women have a higher life expectancy compared to men. And more pertinently, while in many parts of the world, like Africa, in some countries of Asia and Latin America, though in fact, infant and maternal mortality is high, however, old age mortality for women is comparatively low, but a fact not to be overlooked is that morbidity, and that is important, among women compared to men goes high as they age. Clearly, then, older women's life needs attention from multiple aspects, including social and healthcare, social and financial security, literacy and legal empowerment, provision of enabling environments, participation opportunities, and recognition of their contributions as well as strengths. Concerns related to women, young and old, need to be addressed from a right-based approach and a development perspective. As I point out in my recent publication, 2021, a book titled Older Women and Wellbeing, A Global Perspective, published by Springer Nature just a couple of months back, we need to overcome the negativity by which older women are generally looked at in societies. It is pertinent that we hear their concerns, we generate responses towards their well-being, and they be given their due status and respect in society. We need appropriate proactive policy and societal response towards their holistic well-being. It is true that certain older women face difficulties in their private lives, working conditions, working situations, in relationships with different sections of society. But let's at the same time not forget women are also celebrated, they are role models. And yes, you are right, with countries and communities becoming conscious of this fact, and many women's groups generating a very positive response, along with United Nations and its agencies, in various ways, is spearheading this movement of bringing a change in women's life from being disadvantaged to giving recognition to their strengths and contributions at different levels, be it socially, politically, or economically. The group of women doers with a celebrity status is growing in families, communities, and societies, and we are so glad to have them amidst us. Of course, we continue with our struggle to bring more and more women from different groups and segments of the society into, I'm just losing, bring more women from different groups and segments of the society into the category of being the privileged section of the society in many diverse ways. We need to carry on with developing policies, programs, and empowerment strategies for their growth, for their well-being, giving them the right to realize their life of dignity and respect. There are many practices in different parts of the world which we need to share, document, and bring a change which is meaningful universally. I'm happy to share that another of my book, based on a webinar I had organized with HelpAge in October 2021, is now being published, and few of you are contributors to this valuable publication, which showcases good practices for the well-being of the women during the pandemic and beyond from different regions and parts of the world, multiple perspectives. With this background of my thought process, this webinar has been organized where experts from selected countries, due to time restrictions, and just to have the ball rolling for future collaborations, generating further research and responses. I'm really appreciative of the fact that ACAP President Catherine Brown extended full cooperation and collaboration in organizing this webinar. with my and Kiran Puri's NGO, Development Welfare and Research Foundation. I'm grateful to all other fellow board members for extending support to this event and along with members in participating today. I warmly welcome you all. But we now have a formal welcome address by Professor Kulin Harshada from Sociology Department, University of Hawaii, Honolulu. He is the founding member of Active Aging Consortium Asia Pacific, ACAP. He's also a member of Pass It On Network, an international active aging network of advocates supporting older adults as an asset to their communities. He's member of Encore Network, again working for community programs. He's the founding member and president of Change Agents Hawaii, a very productive organization, and has been involved with various elder care programs, along with delivering lectures in gerontology in Hawaii and Japan, and mentoring many in the field. And I'm very happy to share that lately he has provided me a lot of support in few of my endeavors. Over to you, my dear friend, Professor Colin, for your address.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very nice of you. Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to today's ACAP webinar entitled Bringing Focus on Older Women. Now, while I'm the only male, well, perhaps not the only male, but I'm the only male on this panel, my job is to represent and introduce the role and activities of ACAP, Active Aging Consortium Asia Pacific, to you. And Dr. Mala Shankadas is the moderator, and she will be introducing our great panel shortly. But before we start, I just wanted to share a bit about ACAP. ACAP is a consortium of like-minded advocates and researchers promoting active aging as a research and as a policy agenda throughout the Asia Pacific region. Can we see the next slide? Yeah, so as you can see in this slide, ACAP has representatives in numerous countries, probably in excess of 150 individuals, and we've participated in conferences in Hawaii, in San Francisco, in France, in Mongolia, in Thailand, Indonesia, Australia, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, and I may have missed a location or two, but our work to spread the message about active aging, that particular theme continues. Next slide. So the question that we have been asking ourselves is, what are we doing? First, ACAP is doing educational and advocacy work. We're trying to shift the agenda from aging as sick care to aging as well care and aging as an asset to our community. Second, we produce a bi-monthly bulletin that produces or reports on activities throughout the region. And third, we're conducting seminars such as those that we have today. And fourth, and best of all, we are free. There's no membership fee per se. So if you or others you know are interested, send Taryn your email address. The last slide, next slide. As you can see from this slide, we've had a series of webinars in 2002, and we'll have many more planned for the rest of this year. So if you have other topics that you'd like to have discussed relate to active aging, please let Taryn and Dr. Brown know. Last slide. So now let's have Dr. Mala Shankadas of India to moderate this session and introduce the guest speakers. Just for your information, and as she has introduced herself, she has an incredible record of work in gerontology and continues to publish and support the ACAP effort. Mala, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Kulin, for your warm welcome and support, cooperation. And I'm so glad you highlighted about ACAP. I think that will encourage many more who are not yet members to join in. And very appreciative of you providing guidance to ACAP always. Now we move on with the technical session of this webinar, which involves talks by 4 speakers who are researching and contributing in different ways on raising awareness on concerns of older women. They bring in their expertise in highlighting the vulnerabilities of older women, the strengths of older women, the responses in societies, communities, and also families towards their well-being, which are already available, but they will also share what more needs to be done. Today, we are focusing on 4 countries: Australia, India, America, and Hong Kong. Yes, we wanted more representations and also many more aspects of lives of older women covered than what will be taught. But we are working within a framework of a webinar, which has certain limitations, especially of time and restricted participation. We hope to have more discussions, sharing of views, dialogues on various issues, and collaborative work in the future. Please feel free to reach out to me or to any other ACAP board members by sharing your writings, your research, your programs, thoughts, comments on aging issues and on issues related to older men and women, by bringing in various disciplinary perspectives covering different kinds of engagements. Today, we discuss only few topics related to home and shelter issues, the disadvantaged position of older women in societies, the concerns related to need for gender equality in aspects related to working life, home life, improving accessibility to social, health, economic services and provisions, enhancing the political participation, discussing the need for opportunities for women, especially as they age, recognizing their contributions, sharing the extraordinary lives they have, and celebrating the fact that older women are an integral part of families, communities, and societies. Before I invite the esteemed speakers, to whom I'm very grateful on my behalf and also on ACAP's behalf for agreeing to be part of this meeting, I want to stress that please, each one of you, feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat box. And I request all speakers to keep seeing them and responding to them within the chat box itself. We don't have a separate question and answer session due to time constraints and at times difficulty of managing things. But we hope that we will all keep interacting through the chat box. Our first speaker to take this discussion forward is Ellen Webb, Professor of Law and Aging in the discipline of Law, Justice and Society at the University of South Australia. Ellen's research focuses on older people and the law, with an emphasis on housing and accommodation, interdisciplinary responses to abuse, and access to justice. Today, she will speak on older women's vulnerability to housing stress and homelessness. Perspectives from Australia. Over to you, Ellen.
Well, thank you so much. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Mala, and I really appreciate the invitation. Taryn, I was just wondering if you've got my PowerPoints there?
Yes, I do.
Oh, great.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, if you could, I'll just let you know when to move through. There's only a few of them, but I'll just keep the first one up for the moment. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And look, I'd just like to begin by saying that this paper will be examining legal and policy responses in Australia to housing stress and homelessness amongst older women. So I'll just make a few introductory comments. Despite being one of the wealthiest nations in the OECD, Australia's entrenched social and economic disparity affects women throughout the life course. The cumulative effect of societal expectation and income imbalance places them at particular risk in older age. So factors such as increasing life expectancy of Australian women, a lack of affordable housing for purchase or rental, a high rate of divorce and separation, family and domestic violence, and discrimination in employment have created a concerning uptick in the number of homeless older women. Now, there's no one explanation for the substantial increase in housing stress and homelessness amongst this cohort. The group is diverse in age, education, economic location, health status, cultural practices, and personal circumstances. Tenuous housing circumstances can be triggered by a single traumatic event in mid to older age, such as illness, the death of a partner, or a divorce, or simply a lifetime of systemic disadvantage. Indeed, women from more marginalised groups within Australian society, so women from culturally and linguistically diverse communities, Indigenous women, lesbian and transgender women, and women residing in remote or regional communities, face these and other discrete barriers. So, Taryn, would you mind us taking it to the second slide? Thank you. Now, just to this particular logo, if you like, promotes a campaign which is ongoing in Australia at the moment, but was launched just in the last week, being that older women count. And I included some of these statistics just to underscore some of the issues that we're dealing with in Australia in relation to older women generally, and more specifically in relation to housing stress and homelessness. So as we've got here, there's significant disadvantage at the intersections of ageism and sexism. Now, older women are the lowest income earning family group. They are also the largest group of unpaid carers. So this can extend to, grandchildren all the way through to adult children who may have experienced disability, for example, or simply return home after marriage breakdown or other factors. Older women are the fastest growing group of homelessness people in Australia, increasing from 31% between 2011 and 2016. And the results of the 2021 census are trickling through at the moment. And again, there's been a significant uptick in the number of older women who are becoming homeless. I should note here too that often older women who are homeless, it can be quite invisible, because we tend to think of this person who is out on the street, and you can, you see them when you're walking to work in the morning and with the sleeping bag and so on, which is, very upsetting in itself. But with many older women, because of safety issues and other concerns, you've got issues such as couch surfing, living in cars, living off the grid, if you like, just to maintain their own safety and protection. Older women are more likely to live in poverty in Australia. Indeed, 34% of single older women live in poverty. Those who have a job are more likely to experience workplace discrimination. And indeed, this is one of the issues I would imagine that Marla will deal with in her upcoming book in relation to COVID. And that is the adverse impacts on older women's employment, which has occurred in relation to the economic slowdown in relation to COVID. They're more likely to experience elder abuse than men, and older women are more likely to be one of the 50 people who are sexually assaulted in residential aged care each week, which is a stunning statistic and really is quite shameful for Australia. So I'd just like to refer you to the Celebrate Ageing research and that resource in relation to older women count, and there is a discussion of many of these areas if you're interested in looking at any of them more deeply. Taryn, do you mind just taking me to the next slide? Okay, so basically where I'm starting off here today, or well, you know, my focus is that older women are the fastest growing cohort of homeless people in Australia today. And for many, it's an unexpected life shock that tipped them into destitution. And I'm using the term destitution quite deliberately. Okay, can I have the next slide? Now, again, I'm very conscious of time, but just to take you briefly through the sources of housing stress and homelessness. In Australia, economic insecurity is a huge problem for older women simply because of the life course of many women of that generation. So, for example, many women left school early, they may have married and had children early, they were in or out of the workforce, they had childcare responsibilities, caring for older parents and the family and so on. So they tended to be in lower paying jobs. As a result of that, when they get to older age, they haven't got much in the way of retirement savings. They may not have a home, or if they do have a home, if there is an instance of divorce or illness or something goes wrong, that they may in fact be at risk of losing their home. The problem of family and domestic violence is another significant source of housing stress and homelessness. Obviously, what we often tend to forget is that domestic violence, a life that has been plagued by domestic violence, it doesn't necessarily stop because the parties are getting older. And also what we're seeing too is with a greater number of adult children coming home and living with parents due to the economic downturn or other financial circumstances, and they are experiencing, and the older people are experiencing family violence as a result of those situations. Again, COVID was toxic in that respect because people would lose homes in the downturn, return home, and as a result, conditions in the home became really quite difficult, and many older women had to leave. Failed family accommodation agreements is another area where we see this arising, simply because of the way the Australian law works. If for example, let's just say an older person sells their property and moves in with their family and gives the family some money, the proceeds from the sale, and then the agreement doesn't work out, to actually take that matter to court and get the money back is extremely difficult. The older person is in an extremely difficult legal position, and very often they simply just walk away, and that is another source of homelessness. And indeed, with discrimination in employment, if a job goes, particularly if an older person is in the rental market, it's the living arrangements, often they simply can't pay their rent. Now, I won't be able to spend long today because I understand the time constraints, but I just wanted to mention the older women with distinctive challenges. So not only are there the issues that we've already spoken about, but for example, older women in the LGBTQI community who may not have a close family structure because of rejection in their younger days, may experience issues in relation to housing and homelessness as they age. Also, too, the reluctance to go into aged care is another area which is of concern with that particular community. With older women from CALD backgrounds, It's what the Ethnic Community Council of Australia has noted is that older migrants from culturally diverse backgrounds have the following multiple vulnerabilities when compared to older Anglo-Australian populations. So they have lower use of information technology, lower rates of access to services, an increased risk of poverty, less superannuation savings, be less likely to be in paid work, and as a result, there is adverse health and social outcomes which are exacerbated for this particular group, including refugees. Older Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women have particular problems, particularly because of the, quite frankly, disgraceful age discrepancy between our First Nations people and the rest of the population. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are regarded as older at 50. And so, and there are particular problems in relation to housing and homelessness there. Similarly, in relation to with disability or illness, maintaining a place to live and a suitable place to live, and also older women in rural and remote areas. Can I just get the next slide, please, Taryn? Okay, now what about the legal and policy responses in Australia? And I am keeping an eye on the time, Marla, I promise. Now, look, in relation to the Australian law, I'm afraid it's very, very underwhelming in this respect. Australia has it has a lot of problems with housing affordability, even though we are signatory to United Nations conventions that incorporate the right to housing and so on. The fact is that this really doesn't filter down into our laws. We do have, obviously we have housing laws. Older people who are renting are in dire straits at the moment, simply because the Australian housing market is booming, quite, counterintuitively in relation to COVID, and the price of housing and rental has become astronomical, and people who are on fixed incomes, such as pensions, simply can't afford the private rental market. It's in relation to family violence laws. Very often these are ineffective as well, because quite frankly, usually the older woman leaves the home because of the violence, but simply hasn't got she may not be able to return home, but the family violence laws really don't give women very much protection in this area. Just a quick example, we've recently had amendments to tenancy laws, which where usually women, including older women who are experiencing family violence, can terminate their lease in order to leave the violent situation. The problem with that, though, is they can still be left with debts after leaving the home, and of course it's very, very difficult to find anywhere else to go, and they are refuges are full, and so on. We don't have adequate elder abuse laws in Australia. There's tinkering around the edges, but we don't have elder abuse laws which focus on elder abuse, which is often the result of older women having to leave the home. Superannuation laws are quite inadequate in relation to women. Planning laws don't lend themselves to accommodation which would be suitable for ageing older women. So, for example, one-bedroom apartments are often we don't see a lot of them, although there is some good news, which I will close on. And finally, aged care. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but we've been having terrible problems in Australia. We've recently had a Royal Commission into residential aged care and the conditions in residential aged care. And quite frankly, with good reason, people don't want to go into aged care. They would rather stay in precarious living situations out in the community than go into an aged care centre, and the legal responses, the Aged Care Act simply doesn't assist with that. Now, with the Australian policy responses, again, we really, our approach to housing affordability is really quite underwhelming. We really haven't got housing affordability. we really don't have a lot of housing affordability planning ahead. The present government that we have at the moment removed gender-based economic analysis quite a few years ago, so we don't get the perspectives that we often did. And generally, up until now, there has been a lack of housing responses. But the good news, which I can mention, is that as a result of COVID, the government, for example, in Victoria is bringing ahead like $5 billion worth of new housing, and a significant amount of that housing is going to be for older people, in particular older women. So I'll just conclude with these comments. It's likely that the topic of homelessness in Australia, particularly among older women, is not going to be recognised by the general community as a pressing social problem. It's a problem of the other, and not one that many people envisage impacts them personally until it does. Australia's emphasis on wealth creation and economic prosperity, dare I say an obsession in this area, envisages housing as a commodity rather than a human right. And those whose circumstances put them at risk of homelessness are perceived as burdensome and an impediment to overall community prosperity. Unfortunately, we live in an environment where the prevailing cultural norm is that homelessness is an outcome related to personal circumstances and moral failures on the behalf of the individual, rather than an appreciation that the causes are primarily structural and linked to the ideology of the free market. So in short, addressing homelessness is not a vote winner, and persuading political decision makers to recognise and undertake measures to address the structural causes has proven challenging. So on International Women's Day, and knowing that we have got the number of older women experiencing housing stress and homelessness is increasing in Australia and around the world, I'd like to encourage you to think about this important issue and discuss it with your colleagues and friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ellen, for your very informative presentation. It highlighted many important issues which become meaningful for participants from different countries, gives them an opportunity to learn from Australia. And I'm sure the dialogue will continue between you and us and others who are here today.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah, Ellen, and I encourage you to become a member of ACAP.
I will, definitely. I've got the email and I certainly will. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So now Ellen, and I request you to just have a look at the chat box for any comments, because I know you have to leave a bit early. But if you can stay for a few minutes just to
no problem.
interact on the chat box. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we move to our next speaker, Kiran Puri, Director of Development, Welfare and Research Foundation, DOF, India. I want to share that Kiran has been for some time talking of older women in the country as an historian and as a researcher working on aging issues. She has diploma on income security of older people from International Institute of Aging, United Nations, Malta. She has been involved with the adult education programs. And along with me, we work at grassroots levels on raising awareness on rights of older people. She's fond of writing and has in different ways contributed to the field of aging. Today, she brings to light the plight of older women in India. Over to you, Kiran.
Thank you, Mala. Now, this is in accordance to what Ellen also mentioned. And the topic which I'm going to talk about is plight of older women in India and in Southeast Asian countries. Now, continuous increase in life expectancy, on the one hand, calls for celebration, but on the other side, it poses challenges to be taken care of. According to the research carried in this field and the UNFPA report, women constitute 55% of older persons. In a typical arranged Indian wedding, the man is older than the woman. Sometimes the age difference is as much as 10 years. In this type of scenario, many times the wife tends to outlive her husband and thus has to spend many years of widowhood alone without her companion. According to the National Sample Survey Organization, the elderly women face a greater burden of ailments as compared to other age groups and across genders. Multiple chronic diseases afflict the elderly women like osteoporosis, arthritis, diabetes, strokes, cancer, heart ailments, respiratory diseases like asthma, tuberculosis, dementia, Alzheimer's, and oral health concerns, all of which can severely impact the quality of life. Falls are the leading cause of fatal and non-fatal injuries among the older adults, causing hip fractures, head trauma, and death. Nearly 70% of Medicare beneficiaries have 2 or more ailments. The problem doubles when it is accompanied by multiple illnesses and physical ailments. It is at this time that these older women start to depend on their children and the family for support. The family is expected to determine the health situation of the widows in terms of support and care, but if the responsibility is not shouldered in the right perspective, these widows become victims of abuse. The economic disparity among the genders leave women with less income in old age for sustenance, especially when they become widows. Long prolonged post-retirement can be very strenuous. If they do not have enough personal savings, they have to depend on family and state to finance for them. This also leads them to a state of getting more prone to abuse, as their position is regarded lower in many Asian countries where there is prevalence of patriarchy. Apart from this, lack of awareness of their rights and legal issues further succumb older women to exploitation and abuse from the family and their close relatives. Cases have been reported where she has been devoid of her inheritance rights, and that is taken away by other members of the family and her children. Education has a great impact on economic independence, but that has to be encouraged. Thus, older women face verbal, physical, emotional, and financial abuse along with neglect. Now, I've mentioned some points by which we can empower these women so that their condition becomes better. All girls should be well educated before getting married. The difference between the age of the husband and the wife should be minimal. Women should get annual medical checkups done so that in case of any sickness, it can be deducted early and medical aid given. This would reduce their chances of disabilities in the aging years, as well as being the victim of physical and psychological, emotional abuse from the caregivers. Chronic condition has multiple effects as poor health and morbidity diminish the quality of life and well-being of the elderly while increasing psychological distress, perception, and of vulnerability. The government should seriously think of providing social security to the elderly so that they have assured and sufficient income to support themselves and can lead a life of dignity and respect. They should be updated about their legal rights. They should not face the pangs of insecurity and of complete financial dependence on their children. Apart from this, the government should seriously think of opening well-equipped, neat and clean hospitals, elder nursing homes, recreation, where these elderly widows can spend the last days of their lives in peace instead of being worried of dependence and abuse. With this, I would like to conclude and say thank you for being ardent listeners. Thank you. Mala, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Kiran, for your presentation, which has articulated many significant aspects. And you have brought in certain issues, which, yes, you refer to India and South Asia, but are meaningful for many countries. So it is very important, and I thank you for raising this, that how imperative it is for us to address some of these issues and improve the position of older women, not only in countries, but universally. So now we move on to the third speaker, who is Colette Brown. She is Professor Emerita, Thompson School of Social Work and Public Health at the University of Hawaii. She also serves on the state's Policy Advisory Board for Elderly Affairs. Dr. Brown's scholarly work and service, both nationally and in Hawaii, examines aging from a life course perspective with special attention to marginalized older adults and gender and aging. In this webinar, she focuses on the topic Global Gender Inequality and Older Women, the call for change in the United States. Over to you, Colette.
You are
Colette?
right, Frank.
Go.
I am quite sure that it is Omicron because
Well, good afternoon and good morning, depending on your site. Thank you, Mala, for such a nice introduction. Thank you for organizing this panel, to the women on the panel, and to everyone here today. You know, as a clinician and academic researcher, I've spent the last 40 years or so talking to older people, and now I'm older myself. Topics like the aging process, how folks feel about their aging, the aging of others, how policies can help or hinder one's aging, the resiliency of elders, how gender and race and other factors can so much impact the aging process. Excuse me. These are all issues that have always been so important to me. And what I've come to learn after so many years, for men and for women, there are three things people want, and that's comfort, security, and dignity. Comfort, security, and dignity. So the question, if we can go to the next slide, please, Taryn. The question I think really that we always tend to ask ourselves is, why are these three things, comfort, security, and dignity, so hard for so many women to reach? In my work as a social worker and teacher, and validated by research, we know that so often women really do have different issues than men. And we've certainly heard a lot from our previous speakers. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but before I do, let me just stop for a minute and say this. If you're like me, you've been really troubled by the news recently. And quite frankly, I found myself wondering, between war and climate change and COVID, if we should even be talking about gender inequality. But I think what I came down to is this, that it's precisely because of world's problems that we need every person, regardless of gender, race, and age, to solve these problems. Any outdated ideas about what people can contribute and what people can do, well, they really just have to go. So let me start off then saying why we're talking about gender, why this focus on women. And I'll talk, I promise Mala, I will also be as brief as I can be. As the other speakers have mentioned, women have great longevity. And this is fascinating because it really is a female survival advantage. Even with premature babies, male is a risk factor. In every country, according to the UN, women live longer. And in most species, not all, but in most species, the females live longer than the males. So it's hormones, but it's not only hormones. Terra incognita, there's still so much we have to learn. Now, I'm not a biologist, so I'm going to turn more to the social side of gender and aging. Now, I'm going to talk about the US, but also the implications and certainly what we know more internationally. Now, in the US, there's about 6 million more women than men at age 65. And we see this, of course, just gender differential in many countries. And nearly 70% of the 85 and older population are women. We also know that, as with many other countries, there are advantages and disadvantages, and they truly do accumulate with age. So yes, we live longer, we have stronger social networks, but on the other hand, our income is much more at risk. Healthcare and long-term care services are a challenge for us to receive, and care, whether we're receiving care or giving care, really impacts on our life in so many ways. Now, let me just say one more thing, if I may, and that's this, that what we've learned about sex and aging, gender and aging are very undeveloped topics, and we always need to keep that in mind. Now, we also know that gender is a spectrum. So I just want to acknowledge, as we talk about women, the limitations of the whole sex biological research to date. And that's not just in biology, it's in the social science as well. Now, if we can have the next slide, please. Now, the truth is, there's really actually lots of good news. And sometimes when we give talks like this, I fear that we're talking so much about the negative. Just think about the women who are role models for us. You know, I was thinking about Yuriko Koike, who's the governor of Tokyo, or Tokiko Shimizu, who's the Bank of Japan's first female executive in almost 140 years, or Laura Cha, the first female chair of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, Samia Hussein, who's Tanzania's first female president. I could go on and on. Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister in New Zealand. So we know that there truly is change happening. And I think because of that, though, what I sometimes hear from people is, well, women's inequality, isn't that a thing in the past? Isn't everything fine now? Why do we even have to talk about gender inequality? Well, the reason we do is because what we've learned from so many other reports. And before I go to them, if we can go to the next slide, let me just say also that a framework that helps us understand all of this, and frameworks do that, don't they? They really help us organize a lot of information into something that makes sense. The life course basically speaks to that long view of aging, that what happens in our earlier years really does impact our later years, as well as the social, the political, the economic context in which we move through the life cycle. So what we do know from numerous global and national reports, which keep us grounded, is that inequality over the life course sadly exists. In fact, women all over the world, and this is from reports from the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Economic Forum, the OECD, World Bank, all of the reports, if you spend some time looking at them, they all say the same thing, that women earn less than men, and economic gender gap won't be closed for another 200 or so years. We had actually improved, and unfortunately with COVID, we've gotten back, so forth. We've seen improved gender parity in education, but not in political power and not in leadership roles for women. And interestingly, the family remains the domain with the most persistent gender role issues. And very sadly, discrimination and violence, as again, we've heard from our previous speakers, is really on the rise, especially in nations with growing conservative constituencies and leaderships. We can go to the next slide. Now, I wanted to say a few things about the US specifically. And one of the topics that I will, in fact, the main topic I'll really talk about, since I have about 10 minutes, is one of the strands that I think is so important when we talk about women and aging, and that has to do with income. Now, I think all of us would probably agree, if we were sitting around having a cup of tea together, that income alone does not make for a fulfilled and happy life, that there are many things that do. But I think we would also agree that without a decent income, if we can't afford affordable housing, if we can't provide ourselves with good health care, if we're worried all the time about how we're going to sustain ourselves with good nutrition and so forth, then this is not a desirable state for anyone, and certainly not a desirable state when we are older. So if we believe that inequality is wrong and that it impacts across the life course, then we do look at income. And what we have to look at, of course, is when income starts to be a problem for women. And for most women, it's throughout their life. Now, on this slide, what I really just wanted to highlight was the issue of poverty in the 65 and over age group. And what you'll see here, and women is the darker chart, and the lighter, I guess you could call it green, is male. And what you'll see is that in the older age group, starting in 65 and going up to 80 and over, that women are more poor in every age group. And that's very consistent, again, not only in this country, but you'll see this in many, many other countries as well. What's interesting on this chart, I think, is you start to see the benefits of pensions and Social Security, that the poverty rate for women does go down a little bit in the 70 and 74, and then it shoots up again. Could I ask you to have the next slide, please? Because I'm based here in Hawaii, we also wanted to look very specifically at older women here in our own state. And again, the figures that we came up with, and by the way, this was done with work with the Institute for Women's Research in DC, who are our partners on this project. It's very similar to other states. And you can see here, it's very easy to see that men's average income is much greater than women. So you can't miss that. And what you also see is that for women, the reliance on Social Security is really most important. Pensions much less. For men, their pensions and Social Security is our federal program for pension coverage for older men and women, also the disabled and the blind. It's almost equal. So it's very interesting to look at where women and men are each getting their money. And again, for women, much less access to pensions. If we could have the next slide. This will be the last slide that I'll show with regards to this study. But the reason that I wanted to show this to you really is because it looks at older women and men in Hawaii. Once again, the poverty rate, but here we broke it down by race. And too often studies do not do this. They look at men and women as if we are a homogeneous population. We're all alike. And we all know that's actually not true. So you'll see here that certain populations are much more at risk for poverty than others. You can see here what we call the other Asian populations from Thailand, from Korea, Chinese ethnicity, many actually from Vietnam, Hispanic, and other race, primarily African American, or those with two or more races are most at risk. The other thing, of course, that's staring at us as we look at this together is that in every race, women are more poor than men. So it goes back to that question we asked ourselves earlier: why is it that it's so hard for women to reach comfort, security, and dignity? If we could have the next slide. So, in summary, excuse me, in summary, the recent reports from the World Economic Forum, again, all of the major global players when it comes to understanding international global issues in the world, basically they all say the same thing, that yes, globally, women have multiple barriers to reaching a good life as they get older. And this really begins in younger ages. But interesting that when women achieve their full potential, what they also found is that it's not only women, but economies and societies benefit. So this isn't something just for girls and for women, it's something for society as a whole. We saw that in Hawaii, older women are much more economically insecure, and how much we actually pay attention to that with our policies and our programs. I'm not really convinced that we do. Economic insecurity for older women means insecurity for all women. And we say this primarily because we know that older women are more poor. And one of the reasons why is because all of our pensions and Social Security are wage-based. So if you're facing discrimination when you're younger, guess what? You will really, you will pay the price actually in what happens as you get older. If we could have the next slide. So again, in the US, the gender gap, the reason we're talking about the gender gap, it leads to the retirement gap. As we just said, if there's a gender wage gap that younger women face, and they do, if they face unequal distribution of care responsibilities, and I think we've all seen this so highlighted with COVID and women having to leave the workforce because of the lack of elder and child care, discrimination and gender-based violence, and limited affordable housing. All of these things are issues that women face when they're younger that unfortunately then carry over as they get older in terms of limits to their income. For midlife and older women, limited job opportunities, a lot because of ageism that starts so much earlier than for men, poor health or access to long-term care, and of course, a lifetime of gender-based violence for many. So this all equals barriers to a more secure old age. And there's a few things, and one of these I just added recently, unfortunately. I think we have a lack of family policy funding and options. We talk a lot in the United States about how important families are, but I have to share that we don't actually do that in policy. We do very little in terms of actually helping families with paid family leave, with affordable child care, elder care, and so forth. One of the problems is just this policy inertia that's built on so much outdated gender and race ideas that just don't seem to leave us. But I think there's something new that's happening, which I think is more frightening for me. And that's there seems to be a new policy activism to restrict women's rights, whether it's the ERA, whether it's reproductive health. And I think this should be a concern, not just for women, but for men as well. And of course, the lack of safety at home, which continues to impact women and their children throughout their lives. If we could have the next one. So the question always is, whenever I'm in the audience and we're hearing all of this and we think, well, what can we do? I mean, we don't want to leave a session feeling so hopeless and, oh my goodness, things are bad. So I think, and I wish really we were sitting around with a cup of tea, because I would very much like to hear what all of you have to say about this. But I think just quickly, some things that have come to mind for me, and that is, we all want to build a better world in our own way. So with this issue, we need to advocate for a just vision for society. And one way is to learn global strategies and policies and share them. So there are countries that are doing much better than the United States is. So we should be learning what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how we can possibly educate other legislators to new things that can be done. We need to develop and pass legislation to increase gender opportunity and end the pay gap. Support for older women today. It's interesting that so often, even though our White House, and I'm a big supporter of our White House, but their recent reports on women, girls and women, very little on older women. And we really need to be looking at making sure we protect Social Security and other pensions. This really has to be discussed. As another speaker brought up, gender-based violence, it doesn't end for many women. We begin to call it elder abuse, but it really is a continuation, isn't it, of gender-based. And of course, speaking up for proportionate gender care and elder care, always making sure these are available. And finally, if you have access to voting, vote, encourage others to vote. Vote for those who know that women matter. When you're hearing a legislator speak, ask them questions. Make sure that they do believe that, in fact, women do matter. You know, I'm not sure whether there's sometimes a failure of imagination, that people just can't see women in roles. Whatever it is, we need to rewrite the rules and make sure that we're looking at things very differently. Last slide, please. Next slide, please. Now I know, oh, no, I'm sorry, previous slide. Thank you, Taryn. Previous slide, Taryn. Oops, thank you. You know, I'm old enough that I remember things that looked very different from today. So I have daughters, and when they tell me, oh, things haven't changed that much, I think, you know, gender equity can happen, but it takes a long time, and it happens with persistence. And what I'd like to end with, as we look at what's happening here, President Biden last week, or was it the beginning of this week? I'm forgetting. He gave his State of the Union address. And for the very first time, 2 women were seated behind him, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Kamala Harris. So do things change? Yes, they do. It takes persistence. And I think all of us need great imagination and great persistence to make it happen. Last slide. I just want to say thank you so much for having me. For those who have questions, here's my email. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Colette, for an enriching presentation. You highlighted certain important aspects and the necessity for bringing about a change, which is just not only relevant for USA, but for other countries too. The gender aspects have to be dealt with in many diverse ways, and we need to fight all kinds of ism which exists in societies. We now come to the last speaker of this webinar. Before I give some concluding comments, I invite Teresa Tesson, adjunct professor, Department of Social Science, Hang Seng University of Hong Kong. She's also visiting professor of the Respati University of Indonesia, an honorary consultant of the Institute of Active Aging and Jockey Club Smart Aging Hub of the Department of Biomedical Engineering, Hong Kong, Polytechnic University. Teresa also lectures part-time on the MSc in Clinical Gerontology and End-of-Life Program, Department of Medicine at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She has a vast experience as a gerontologist with her research on social work and aging, active aging, gerontotechnology, age-friendly city, and dementia caregiving. She's involved with the government in various capacities in her country. Her topic today is extraordinary women in extraordinary times. Over to you, Teresa.
Thank you so much, Mara, for your very kind introduction. And I'm much honored today to join the previous 3 distinguished speakers on talking about older women issues on this special day, the International Women's Day. So we have heard a lot about gender inequalities, you know, the disadvantaged group of being older women. So on the lighter side, I would like to share with you stories. Actually, on International Women's Day, on one hand, we're trying to make changes, you know, to better lives for older women. On the other hand, we are also trying to congratulate and celebrate success and achievements of women. So today, I'm going to share some stories of 3 extraordinary women on what they have done to change their own lives, as well as lives for other people. So may I just, I'll share my slides. Okay. So my topic today is to share stories on 3 extraordinary women and what they have done in Hong Kong. So this is Hong Kong. Welcome. I'm going to
Teresa?
briefly talk about, yes.
Oh, I don't think we can see your screen.
Oh, can you please share then? Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Oops. I can only see my slides.
We can see them,
Hmm?
Teresa. We can see
Yes.
your slides. Yes.
Oh, so I'm on this page on statistics, Hong Kong, a super aged society. Is it okay? Are you seeing this one?
I'm sharing my screen.
Content.
Teresa, I'm sharing my screen now.
Okay, let me just turn it off.
Okay.
Okay, is this on contents now? On the contents
Yeah,
page?
yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
good. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah. So briefly, I'm going to share with you some aging statistics in Hong Kong and impact on aging older women during pandemics, and then sharing the inspiring stories. Next, please. Next. Okay, probably this is the first time of my speech that I'm going to address Hong Kong as a super aged society. It was only last week that the Hong Kong Census Department reported that, as of today, about one in 5 of our Hong Kong population are people 65 and above. So basically, we have marked 20% of the total population as 65 and above, and that qualify Hong Kong to be a super aged society. And then in the years to come, in 15 years time, it will be 1 in 3, and further down, it will be 4 in 10. Today, our total population is about 7.4 million, but the median age, what is alarming is that our median age stands at 46.3. That means half of the population of Hong Kong are aged 65 and above, and the other half is 65 and below. And you might have been heard that Hong Kong has the longest life expectancy. And today, the average life is 85.16 in Hong Kong. Next, please. We become the city with the longest life expectancy in the world since 2016. That means that in 2020, the life expectancy for male in Hong Kong stands at 82.9 and female is 88. So there is a gap of 5 years, and older women live longer, about 5 years than men. Next, please. So some of the older women statistics, which is very similar to Australia, to India and US, we have more women than men in Hong Kong. The sex ratio is about 887 men to 1,000 women. And this is more so, at the older age. For people who are 85 and above, female outnumber male by 3 times, and women live longer by about 5 to 6 years. So in general, which is same as everywhere. Older women are less educated, live alone, more health issues, live on welfare, earn lower wages, and they tend to suffer from violence and abuse when compared to older men. Next, please. So some of the impacts on older women during pandemics, as usual, we are the less vulnerable group. Since December 2019, once we started to be attacked by COVID-19, Hong Kong has recorded more than 400,000 cases as of today. During the fifth wave, which has started about 3 months ago, the Hong Kong's fatality rate is now the highest in the developed world. In average, we have recorded 8 deaths per million. And most infected cases and the number of deaths are older people, age 60 plus, especially those who did not receive vaccination. And again, there are some major impacts on older women during pandemic, such as physical isolation and deterioration because of the social distancing measures and also lack of, like protective gears. They're worried and they do not want to go out. And by doing that, they don't even want to go out to seek medical advices. So, their physical health deteriorate. And we have studies showing that 70% more of the older women reported loneliness. And of course, the caregiving role is doubled because most of the people will stay home and then, adding on to a lot more caregiving chores and burden to them. Studies also show that the women, they show anxiety much more by 40%, and 30% reported depression. And the worst is that, even the suicide attempt rate, is up by 30%. So which is quite alarming. And especially lately when there are some people leaving Hong Kong, migrating to other countries. So the older women, they feel abandoned by family. And of course, they suffer more violence and abuse. Next, please. So today, on the lighter side, I would like to share with you that despite all these gender inequalities, all these disadvantages, still there are a group of women who are doing special things, and not just by just helping themselves, but they're also helping people, in families and society. So I would like to introduce to you an organization that I found with the other 9 women. It's called the Women's Initiative for Aging Successfully. In short, it's WINGS. It was established 10 years ago during the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. So the aim is to empower people to take personal responsibility for health, wealth, and happiness. So, a lot of elderly or women organizations, they're more concerned about women in the present stage, the career, the family. But what we really want to hope to achieve is that to start preparing women for aging, for their later life, to continue to age actively, independently, with dignity. So last year, at our 10th anniversary, we celebrate by organizing an Outstanding Active Age Women's Award to honor women who have made changes, for their own lives and changes for the lives of others. Next, please. So today I'm going to just share the inspiring stories of 3 women. The first one is Jessie Yu. She is the Chief Executive of Hong Kong Single Parents Association. She is the lady in pink. Next, please. Well, Jessie comes from a poor family and she married in her 20s in the year 1980. She, unfortunately, her husband was an abusive person. So finally, she divorced him with 2 young children. So she faced a lot of discrimination as a divorcee and single parent in the 1980s, such as when she has to rent a house, when she seeks for employment. And the worst thing is she has to encounter the insulting process during recovery of the arenas of maintenance payments from her husband, that finally he just disappeared. So with all this, her own experience, the hardship, she established the Hong Kong Single Parents Association. It's the first ever association to help single parents, mostly single women, and she would provide them with practical assistance, hotline, and she even sit on government board to advise the government on needs of single parents. Under pandemic, in the year 2021, Jessie has been successful in advocating for her bill. Hong Kong SAR LegCo has passed the bill on arrangement on reciprocal recognition and enforcement of civil judgment in matrimonial and family cases by the courts of the Chinese mainland and of the Hong Kong SAR. Because at that time, there are a lot of cross-border marriages where mainland Chinese women would marry to Hong Kong men. And with that, after the divorce, it's so difficult for them to, recover the arenas of maintenance payment. And Jessie, has been successful in pushing this bill. And she has done a lot of other things, to raise the mental health issues and to help them to overcome the difficulties. Next, please. The second extraordinary woman I would like to introduce is Amy Wu. Next, please. Amy is a very popular Cantonese opera artist, and eventually she became a therapist. Amy also comes from a broken family. Even though she has a very successful career in performing arts, in singing, in performing, but she still felt depressed and unhappy with all her childhood memories until she found her religion and her second husband, a famous director. She started studying for counseling degree at age 57 for 8 years because she wanted to use her own depression experience to help others. So during the pandemic, a lot of people are depressed, especially women. She started an innovative subsidized counseling service in 2021 during the second and the third wave of pandemic. She offered 140 sessions of counseling sessions, providing practical advice and guidance to help a lot of women to achieve their life goal. So with her extensive network, she also partnered with different organizations, governments, charities, and corporates to find resources and continue to provide, very affordable counseling training and sessions for women. And she also helped unemployed women to match the dream jobs. So why Amy could be so, popular and successful in doing this is because she is so easily gain trust from her clients, as she is a well-known artist. A lot of people know about her, and they're willing to open their hearts to her and accept her guidance. She also holds a radio program and to provide dial-in counseling service. Next, please. The next extraordinary woman is Rebecca Choi. She is a founder of Golden Age Foundation. Next, please. Rebecca is a renowned pioneer in convention industry in Hong Kong and China back in 1980s. After retirement, she aims to pass on her expertise to groom new blood. But in view of the aging population, she founded Golden Age Foundation, which helps to promote active and productive aging by organizing an annual Golden Age Summit and Expo since 2016. So during the first wave of pandemic, she has started to co-organize with a lot of other organizations, such as the School of Medicine Policy Research, to launch different sessions to promote public awareness. So because at that time, a lot of people don't know much about COVID-19. So she has helped a lot to do this, to raise public awareness. And the last annual summit and expo in 2021, she has also changed to a hybrid format so that more than 80 local and international speakers and also attracted more than 16,000 local and global participants to continue to discuss on smart aging issues during the pandemic. So through this expo and summit platform, Rebecca was able to connect the world with Hong Kong to co-create active and productive aging strategies and services to prepare for the new normal. Next, please. So in conclusion, we can see that, the stories of these three extraordinary women, they have not only made changes for themselves, but they have also made changes for their families, for community, and also for the world. So Jessie helped to shape policy for single women. Amy offered the innovative one-stop counseling service for so many people. And Rebecca for raising public awareness of the pandemic to Hong Kong and the globe. Next, please. So from the inspiring stories, I'm sure that, they have changed the way the world perceives the strength of women. Again, we always say that when there is a woman, there is magic. So together, we women, we don't wait for the perfect answer. We made the answer perfect. Next. So together, I thank you all for joining me today, and happy Women's Day. Together, we can soar higher. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for a very interesting talk and sharing the highlights of women achievers and celebrities with extraordinary lives, good role models. It was absorbing and illuminating, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. So I once again request speakers to check the chat box for any comments and questions for them, and please answer them. However, I also want to invite you, in case you have any comments, this is your last opportunity, please put it now. So as we come towards the end of the webinar, I would like to give my concluding comments, and I'm very glad that we are keeping within our time limits, although exceeded by just a couple of minutes, but that's okay. You will all agree that this webinar has been very constructive, good learning, sharing of many important aspects relevant from different perspectives. The talks have been illustrative of few countries, but the topics and emphasis on issues cut across nations and regions of the world, as many concerns related to older women are universal in nature, penetrating through social, cultural, and economic boundaries. The presentations made today by all the experts point towards new directions which discourse on older women is generating in this country, in this world, and in this century. The experts point to the need to be pragmatic in our approach. The experts practically and realistically discuss the contributory dimensions and responses to the well-being of older women. Each one of them brought attention to the view that differential vulnerabilities require specific interventions, which when put into practice can create empowering environments. They stated the need to adopt strategies that facilitate better healthcare, access to specific public services, overcoming ageist attitudes, and prevailing discriminatory practices. As pointed out by all, it is imperative to have a gender and age-focused strategy at national and international levels to aging issues and life in later years. With these concluding remarks, I would like to end this webinar, but I cannot do so without profusely thanking each of the speakers, Colin, Ellen, Kiran, Colette, Teresa, for sparing their time towards the success of this event, and each of the attendees, thank you for being with us. Really appreciate your participation. Thanks once again, and we look forward to your support for the next webinar in the beginning week of April on health issues in line with the Decade of Healthy Aging 2020 and 2030. This time, we'll be trying to cover the World Health Day and bringing focus on universal health coverage within this paradigm of healthy aging. Of course, circular and invite for that will be put together and shared with you in a couple of weeks' time. But meantime, before we close up, everybody please have a look at the chat box for any responses, and anybody wants to put in a last comment, please do so before Terrin will end it. And I really appreciate all the technical support which Terrin has provided to this webinar and to other webinars also in the past, and which she'll continue to do in the future. Without her, it would be so difficult to manage these events. Thank you so much, everyone, and Terrin especially, and my co-panelists and my colleagues from ACAP. Thank you. Please have a look at the chat box and then we can end.